gender and sexuality studies. We want this to be a safe space, so please feel comfortable asking any and all questions you may have. There will be a space for asking questions at the end, but if you're worried you might forget your question or you just want to get it out there, you can send it in the chat and we'll bring it back up during that question asking part of the night. And so to start off, we're going to review some helpful terminology. Oh, and for your information, this will be recorded only up until the Q&A begins. So words to know. So menstruators. So while the majority of people who menstruate are women, it's important to remember that there are people across the entire gender spectrum who do as well. Therefore, it's important that we use gender neutral language whenever possible while talking about menstrual health and period poverty. So speaking of period poverty, that's kind of simply defined as having a lack of access to menstrual products because of financial restraints, and this ties directly to the next term, which is menstrual health. And so menstrual health is defined by UNICEF as a term that encompasses menstrual hygiene, as well as broader systemic factors that link to menstruation to health, and just overall well-being, such as gender equality, education, equity, empowerment, and just general human rights. And then our last term is reusable period products. So the two most popular kinds of reusable products are reusable cups and reusable pads. The cups are usually pretty small and made of silicone or rubber, and the pads are usually made out of cotton or bamboo fabric. And these are the two items we'll be offering in our product starter kits. So these are all your terms to know, and I'd like to throw it to Ranen, who will be our host for the evening.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ranen. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm currently serving as the student union president. I spent the past 2 years advocating for the expansion of free menstrual products across our university, and I'm proud to announce that for the 2021-2022 school year, we'll be getting $50,000 extra dollars. That is the second slide about me. So should we go to the next panelist?
Hey, I'm Laurel Segrist, and I'm the Director of Programs with the St. Louis Area Diaper Bank, and I helped launch the Alliance for Period Supplies here in St. Louis, a chapter of a national network, just in March of 2020. And so there's a lot of things that we're doing here at the Alliance for Period Supplies in the St. Louis Area Diaper Bank. These are three that are close, near and dear to my heart. Obviously, ending the lack of access in St. Louis specifically, and talking about periods and working around the issue of period stigma and negative period stigma, and then carving out space for young people to be at the forefront of social change, volunteerism, and philanthropy. These are all a big deal to us here at the St. Louis Area Diaper Bank and the Alliance for Period Supplies.
Thank you so much, Laurel. Can we go on to the next slide?
Hi, I'm Dr. Lewis Wall. I'm a professor of sociocultural anthropology at Washington University. I'm also a professor of obstetrics and gynecology in the School of Medicine. I'm jointly qualified. I'm the president and co-founder of an organization called Dignity Period that works to improve menstrual hygiene education and provide reusable menstrual hygiene products in Ethiopia and here in St. Louis. I worked with a remarkable woman named Frawini Mabratu, who was actually named the CNN Hero of the Year in 2019. Who set up a factory to produce these products in Ethiopia. We've distributed materials to almost 350,000 students overseas. We also have become engaged in St. Louis. We did a research study with my colleague Ann Siebert-Kuhlman from SLU on period poverty in St. Louis, and discovered, particularly among low-income women and menstruators, it's a major problem. Our organization is actively involved in the local Period Alliance, and we provide the reusable pad kits to that alliance.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, can we go to the next slide, please?
Hi, my name is Guhar. I am a student studying in India currently, and I'm also a youth ambassador for sustainable menstruation in Bangalore, India. I've been a part of this campaign for the past 4 years, and I'm happy to say that I've been making a lot of progress as we go by. I also recently conducted a fundraiser with a company called Stone Soup in India, and I raised 1 lakh rupees, and this money went towards buying menstrual cups for the underprivileged and the frontline workers of Bangalore.
Thank you so much, Guhar. Oh,
Yeah, so this
so
is just about how I got into sustainable menstruation.
fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's start off by broadly talking about menstrual health and hearing from our panelists about what inspired you to become involved in the work surrounding menstrual health and reusable period products in the first place. So why don't we start with Dr. Wall?
Well, having trained as an obstetrician gynecologist, my entire professional career has been involved with menstruation to some degree. But in 2014, I had a Fulbright scholarship to Mekelle University in northern Ethiopia. And it was during that experience, I lived there with my wife for 8 months. I met Frawini Mabratu and saw what she was doing to try to bring menstrual hygiene products to the local community in northern Ethiopia. And it was a no-brainer. It was something that we felt we had to get involved in. And from our interest there, that expanded once we returned to St. Louis to investigate the situation here locally.
Fantastic. And how about you, Ms. Segrist?
So prior to coming into the St. Louis area diaper bank, I did 3 years of in-home services here in St. Louis, primarily in North and South City. And we were handing out diaper bank diapers to families, and the conversation kept coming up, can you get me pads? Can you get me tampons? And so it started to become an obvious light bulb moment of there's nowhere else where people in our city can get these things right now, easily, quality products. And when I heard that the St. Louis Area Diaper Bank was thinking about starting a program, I approached their founder and leader to get involved. I've also experienced period poverty, which is a part of why I'm so passionate about it personally. I grew up in rural Missouri, which is quite its own resource desert. And so I'm very passionate about it from my own experiences. And that's how I got my start.
Thank you so much. And we're definitely going to be talking a lot more about period poverty in the next few questions. And lastly, Guhar.
So for me, it was my personal experience with my own period that led me to start investigating around safe and sustainable menstruation. I was only in the 7th grade when I first got my period, but all I can remember is how uncomfortable I found the sanitary pads and how many rashes, etc., that I got from them. So when my mom offered these cloth pad alternatives to me, it was really like a blissful thing. It was only a year after after I made the switch to these cloth pads, but I started to investigate all the health and environmental problems that were associated with the disposable sanitary pads, and how the cloth pads were just overall much better for menstrual health and hygiene, and also the environment.
Thank you so much. Kind of building off of this question, I want to hear more about how, if at all, you've seen conversations around menstrual health evolve over the course of the past few years. And Ms. Segrist, let's start with you because the Diaper Bank recently started this new program.
Yeah, so I would say that it's not unfamiliar for this to be the taboo topic. And I think in the last couple of years, we've started to see a shift. And I think that that shift is really being pulled along by young people. And I think a lot of people are still struggling with access to good education and information around their periods. That has definitely been coming up in surveys that we've done in social media. Regardless of income or where you live, your lack of understanding your education or your ability to talk to people about it, that taboo thing keeps coming up. But I think it's starting to tentatively, the tide on this is starting to change a little bit. Even last year before the pandemic, I spoke at Metro High School to their entire school at one time about what we were doing here at the St. Louis Alliance for Period Supplies. And the response was so positive, and it wasn't taboo at all. So I think things are starting to change. It's just taking a lot of intentional work.
Thank you so much. And Guhar, how about you?
Well, I have a little different perspective. So, living in India, menstruation was and still is a really big taboo topic. And it's often like menstruation is often deemed as impure. So, even though, like in India, Hinduism is one of the most followed religions, but it does play a major role in period taboo. So, menstruating women are often excluded from social and religious events and were denied entry into temples and shrines and even kept out of kitchens. But however, recently in the Bollywood industry, there was a major impact on this taboo topic, as there was a controversial movie called Padman that came out in 2018, which raised awareness about menstrual health in India. Bollywood being one of the most biggest film industries, it definitely changed a lot of conversations and made the topic less of a taboo. Even though the movie promotes the disposable sanitary products instead of the sustainable period products, it still helped focus a lot on menstrual health, and it also did help with the taboo, and it started initiating conversations about menstrual health.
Thank you so much. And lastly, but definitely not least, Dr. Wall, how about you?
Well, I've been in the somewhat unusual position of being a guy who talks about menstruation. So that that shatters a lot of barriers right there to begin with, because it's not something people expect. I've had two experiences that are culturally disparate. The first one is in Ethiopia, which, like India, menstruation is very much a taboo topic. And the program we have run is school-based. And so we have a team of people from the university who go out to schools targeting grades 5 and higher. We have a program that's run in the schools for all the students in those grades, male and female, because male attitudes are 2/3 to 3/4 of the problems around menstruation worldwide. We provide them with an educational booklet that's both in English and the local language. The fact that it's school-based and they get this material suddenly means it's okay to talk about. The school is sanctioning it. It's okay within the community. The booklets go home with the students so their parents see them. It starts to open up conversations there. And then a couple of weeks after that initial approach, the team goes back and we distribute menstrual hygiene kits to all of the menstruating girls in the schools, that consist of 4 reusable pads and 2 pair of underwear. People don't think about it, but it's really tough to use a pad if you don't have any underwear. And in rural parts of Ethiopia, a lot of girls don't have underwear either. And so this cracks open the subject within the community, and it's had a very noticeable effect.
Thank you all so much, and especially for your work trying to destigmatize these really important conversations surrounding menstruation. I want to jump into our next topic about period poverty in the city of St. Louis. There was a 2019 study that was done that found that 2/3 of low-income women were not able to afford menstrual products within a year. And we know that period poverty continues to be a really salient problem both here in St. Louis and around the world, which oftentimes precludes people from being able to access education or being able to focus on their own lives. So I just want to start off this conversation about period poverty by asking about what period poverty is like in St. Louis and what it's like abroad. So why don't we start with Guhar?
Sure. So I think it's very different, the period poverty in like St. Louis or anywhere else. In India, like you can see in the West that period poverty essentially means like lacking money for tampons, pads, or menstrual cups, or the medication for cramps, etc. However, in India, I feel like there's a different perspective, as nearly a quarter of girls in India drop out of education when they begin menstruating. And I feel like that's a major issue that is underlooked. And according to the report by the Indian Ministry of Health, only 12% of the menstruators in India actually have the exposure to proper period products. and the rest of the 88% are largely dependent on unsafe material like rags, cloth, hay, etc., as their only available alternative. And these can expose them to different infections and diseases, such as the UTIs and bacterial vaginosis. So I feel like it's a different issue, and it's something that isn't looked at as much, because when we look at period poverty, we focus more on not having the resources to purchase, say, the period products such as tampons, pads, etc. But in different countries, the situation's a lot different. And I mean, I think it's just a different perspective altogether.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Dr. Wall, I know you've also done work abroad. So do you want to share a bit more about your perspective on that before we go into the domestic situation?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's similar to the situation in India. One of the problems in Ethiopia is that the products actually don't exist. If you live in a rural village and you want to buy menstrual hygiene supplies, you can't get them. There's no place to purchase them. You have to go into a city and maybe you'll find some disposable products in a store, which by local standards are fairly expensive. So that's why Frawini started this factory to try to jumpstart a commercial scale menstrual hygiene product industry in Ethiopia. And she's been pretty successful, but there are still problems with distribution and access. So a lot of people, particularly in rural areas, make their own. They use rags, they cut up old clothes or pieces of mattress, or in some cases, they'll use leaves or raw material. We've heard stories about some women in rural areas who dig a hole in the ground and squat over it for 3 or 4 days because that's all that they can do. So it's vastly different than what you find in the United States or other high resource countries.
Thank you so much. Ms. Segrist, do you want to talk more about St. Louis and about the United States, I guess, in terms of what period poverty looks like and how it manifests?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's great that you guys mentioned the difference between not being able to access any products because they're just not around versus there being stores full of products and you just don't have any money to buy them. And they are very different and the approaches are different. And what we've been seeing is that there was the study done, obviously, that you referenced earlier. And the cool thing about that study is one of the first in the US that wasn't funded by a major manufacturer of these products, which is important. And it's cool to have that in St. Louis, but it also really highlights the income disparities and the challenges and the structural inequalities that exist in this city. And period supplies are very sought after. A personal story of when I was working in for a nonprofit agency a couple of years ago, I had a woman who did not want me to visit her because of situations in the home that were going on. And my ticket in became a box of tampons into that household to check in on the kiddos. And I think that just illustrates how valuable those items were to that individual. They were willing to risk the stability of their family by inviting a stranger in to see what was going on just to get tampons. And I think that desperation in 21st century America is something that a lot of Americans are very unaware of. They assume that everyone has access. I've had adults talk to me within the last couple of weeks about how they never believed that anyone in America wouldn't have pads and tampons if they needed them. And so I just think it's been very eye-opening for a lot of people. I think rural areas are also, like I said, resource deserts here in the United States. We have cities, we have our urban areas, our urban centers, but we have miles and miles of rural towns where people do also have period poverty going on, and it is affecting their ability to get to school. They tend to just not show up. They don't tend to drop out from what we've seen, but they just tend to just not show up when they have their period. And that goes for the urban centers as well. And we've been able to ask a few questions over the pandemic of individuals getting our period supplies from the Alliance. And this seems to be what we've been calling a gateway resource for them to get to work and to get to school and to participate in life.
Thank you so much. I also want to talk about the connection here between menstrual poverty and college campuses, a really big issue that I've gotten to personally interact with and work on. And if you look towards American college campuses, for example, 1 in 10 college students experience menstrual poverty in some form, but 1 in 5 first-generation students are experiencing that poverty. So this also is an issue of equity and making sure that our campuses are accessible to all students from all different backgrounds. If there isn't access to those pads, like everybody on this panel has mentioned, then it really opens up the risk not just to toxic shock syndrome, but also to cervical cancer, infections, and other forms of health problems that would really harm the ability of menstruators to go to work, to be able to access education, and to be able to go on with their everyday lives. On that topic, let's talk about how period poverty affects the day-to-day lives of those who are affected. So for our panelists, can you share a bit more about how everyday life is being impacted when you aren't able to go to a store and purchase period products, or when you are not able to afford them in the United States? How does that impact your ability to access education, to go to work, to be able to interact on an day-to-day basis? Let's start with Ms. Segrist.
Sorry about that. My mouse got lost on another screen. So yeah, so it's really interesting they brought up college specifically. I experienced period poverty a couple of times throughout my life in different situations, starting when I first got my period all the way up through college. And I was fortunate enough to get into college, but I was there on scholarships and I was working full time to pay for it and to pay for everything else. And so things like basic hygiene items were pretty low on the list of things that I was going to go for in my lineup of needs. And I have skipped class because I had my period. And I think that a lot of people have been in the situation where they're like, I could risk it. I could just use toilet paper. I could try to MacGyver the situation. But then they think, well, I just don't want to risk by accident bleeding through and then the repercussions of what comes with that. And I was lucky that the days that I skipped class never fell on important tests or finals or situations like that. But I know for some people that has not been so lucky.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Guhar, do you want to go next?
Sure, I don't have much of a perspective on this, but I'll just try to add what I can. So I feel like period poverty can the effects of period poverty can be so different and varied. And like Ms. Segrist mentioned, it does affect a student's attendance in schools and colleges, etc. Because it also affects like your day-to-day lives and your safety. And also it does periods do impact your emotional stress and anxiety, which I feel like does play an important part in a college student's life.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Dr. Wall, would you like to add in about some of what you've seen in terms of how period poverty is affecting people?
In some ways, I think it's intuitive because there's such a taboo nature around menstruation and bleeding. Nobody would really want to be seen in public with menstrual blood running down her legs or staining clothes. And so people shun the possibility of social interactions under those circumstances. But to get right down to it, this is a matter of basic hygiene. And the problem is that our hygienic infrastructure has largely been built from a male perspective. And because most men don't menstruate, they don't think about it. But in some ways, it's equivalent to toilet paper. What would the public reaction be if you stopped providing toilet paper in public restrooms? There would be outrage if you had to bring your own rolls of toilet paper around campus or wherever you went, and it just wouldn't be tolerated. And we just need to get to that level with menstrual supplies for similar kinds of reasons.
Thank you so much. So our next topic that we're going to be discussing is specifically centering reusable period products and their role in being able to tackle period poverty. The first question that I want to pose for our panelists is, what are common misconceptions about reusable period products, and how can we combat those misconceptions through education and through information? So why don't we start with Guhar?
Hi. Okay, so as mentioned in the beginning, there are two main reusable period products in the market today, which are menstrual cups and the reusable cloth pads. So one common misconception with menstrual cups is that they can give you TSS, also known as toxic shock syndrome. And I think one is education to debunk this myth, but also I'd like to explain it. So menstrual cups collect blood rather than absorbing them like tampons do. Therefore, you don't have the risk of getting toxic shock syndrome because that's only a rare bacterial infection that is associated with tampon use because tampons collect and absorb the blood, whereas menstrual cups only collect them into the small little cup that they are. And also another misconception with the reusable pads and the cloth pads are that they are not sanitary. Again, I would like to debunk this by saying that the cloth menstrual pads are free from irritating materials, so you can avoid the unnecessary exposure to the synthetic plastic ingredients and also all the chemicals that are present in the disposable sanitary pad. And one of the lesser known benefits of switching to reusable pads is the period positivity that comes along with it.
Thank you so much. Ms. Segrist, do you want to share a bit as well?
Yeah, so a couple of things that have come up, especially when we're trying to hand these items out to the general public when they are in need of them, is the upfront, how expensive they are. And we're always trying to say, you know what, there are options out there that are much more affordable than the more expensive things that you sometimes see on TV or on Instagram. Like there are options to make this available to everyone. And then there's organizations like ours and like Dignity Period that are trying to make sure that they're available everywhere. And so that's one thing. But then also the usability in crisis, when you are someone who doesn't feel like you can take on the learning curve of these new items and you've used disposables your whole life, or you feel pressure, oh, the weight of the environment is on my shoulders, but I'm stressed, this is too much. Something that we've been doing is kind of flipping that on its head a bit and comparing menstrual cups to your favorite coffee cup. I mean, everyone has a coffee cup that they're going to use and you're just going to clean it out and you're going to reuse it. It's not so much that you have to take on the whole issue of environmentalism on your back as a person who's in crisis. Just use it like a coffee mug. And then same with the reusable pads. Like you're going to use a towel all the time and clean that. It's not all that different, really, at its core.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Dr. Wall, do you want to share some common misconceptions you tend to hear?
Well, I think the biggest problem we have has been the success of the disposable menstrual product industry in getting people to shift their minds to the idea that menstrual products are yucky things that you should use and throw away. If you want to think of it in its most basic terms, a reusable menstrual pad is nothing more than an extra thick pair of underwear. You don't throw your underwear away every time you wear a pair of underwear. You wash them in the laundry and you reuse them. They just soil a little bit differently and they may require a little bit different care than your regular underwear, but that's not a deal. And the other thing is people tend to think of these as being like diapers, but they're not. Here's an example of one of our pads that's produced for St. Louis. It's got a snap that fits around the crotch of a pair of underwear in the back, and it's very soft, comfortable material. It's non-irritating. It has a plastic sort of backing that prevents bleed through if you have a heavy period, but it's just as comfortable as a pair of underwear would be. And that's what people should start thinking about this as. And it's cheaper. A pack of 4 of these will probably last a year and a half with care, maybe longer. And they cost about as much as a regular package of disposable menstrual pads. So once you get through that initial investment of 2 periods or 3 periods or however much they use, you're home free for a year and a half. So
Well said, thank you. And Ms. Segrist, before we move on to the next one, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sorry. I think someone is on the motion sensor and my office keeps going off. But I was going to say, I noticed in the chat that someone asked about where our perception of what's socially acceptable in this area comes from. And I was just going to say that in getting feedback from individuals about what they do and what they don't want to use, and it is far fewer that ask for our reusable kits. But a really interesting thing that's come up is that some people say, well, I had to use a rag, or I had to make do with whatever, and now I can afford to buy disposables, which is a really interesting mindset and probably a conversation for another day. But I think that that exists, that once you are able to afford what society has deemed normal, as a person who has had to want, it can be really hard to build over that bridge. And that's something that we're working on.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I think even in the WashU community, there is a lot of misinformation about reusable products. In the survey that I was able to conduct last year, there was a 5-to-1 ratio of students who would prefer plastic to reusable products. And I think that's in big part because of misconceptions around this, around the safety, around the cost, and around the comfort of these products that all three of our panelists were able to discuss when answering this question. So last question about reusable products. What are the benefits to reusable period products? I know we obviously were able to go through a lot of these, but I just want to be able to offer space to talk more about this if there are other ones that come to mind that we weren't able to talk about. And Dr. Hall, let's start with you.
Well, one of the big benefits actually in a country like Ethiopia is environmental. Disposable products are tough to dispose of. If you live in a country that has marginal sanitary facilities in terms of the construction of latrines or toilets or running water, disposing of disposable products in a latrine or in a toilet in a building can be catastrophic for the integrity of the sewage system. So that's a big issue. And the reusable ones are much more environmentally friendly from all kinds of different aspects.
Thank you so much. Ms. Segrist?
Yeah, so there's, I think you've touched on quite a few of the perks of these products. One being, if in college, had I had access to a menstrual cup, when in college, I didn't know what a menstrual cup or reusable pads were. I didn't know that they existed. So I think that's one piece of this. But then also, if I had realized that I could use those items every month instead of having to worry about it the next time it came around, that would have solved a lot of issues for me. And so I hope that some others do.
Thank you. And lastly, Guhar?
I think a lot of points have been covered, but I'm just going to summarize. Also, touching what Dr. Lewis-Wall said, in India and other like developing countries, there isn't much facilities for disposing the disposable sanitary pads or tampons that are now so advertised. And the safest way to dispose or to get rid of these pads are incinerators, but there aren't a lot available in the developing or the third world countries. So then promoting these disposable sanitary pads is not exactly the right way to go. So when you look at the reusable period products, like for menstrual cups, they're budget friendly because you can purchase one and use it for up to 5 to 10 years. And menstrual cups are definitely safer because they're usually made of medical grade silicone. And this is the same material that can be used in like other breast implants, etc. So that you know that they're very safe for your body. And like I mentioned before, they collect blood instead of absorbing it, which makes it a lot safer for your menstrual hygiene. And they're eco-friendly again. And looking at cloth pads, they're reusable and they're usually made of biodegradable and environment-friendly materials. And they're also pocket-friendly again. So.
Thank you so much. And we're going to close off this moderated questioning section with 2 questions for our panelists, and you can answer these depending on whether or not you want to. Do any of you have questions for one another? And are there areas of this topic that we have not explored that you feel like we should before we go into the audience questions?
I think one area that we probably need to think about a little bit more is the impact of these issues on the homeless population, particularly women. Not only do they have access problems for getting materials because of their financial frailty, they often lack safe places where they can change pads or wash pads. Many women in those circumstances are afraid of getting assaulted if they use public toilets, particularly at night. And so there are a whole lot of other issues that pack in around this that cause additional social difficulties for some of these menstruators.
I think another issue that hasn't been explored are the chemicals that are present in disposable sanitary pads and tampons. Like I recently started doing a bit of research, and I found only limited information that chemicals such as dioxins, styrene, etc., are used in the disposable sanitary pads. And styrene, I mean, is used in like car tires. Like you wouldn't want that to be in your sanitary pad, which is in direct contact with your menstrual health. So I feel like that is something that has to be investigated, because when you do purchase a pack of sanitary pads, you do not see the contents of it disclosed on the pad or on the package. You just know that, okay, it's a sanitary pad, right? I'm going out to buy it because that is what you use on your period. But if you actually if you look up online, you don't find what are the contents of, like, what is inside of the sanitary pad that is in contact with your bloodstream, which you're wearing every day for so long, every month, for a good amount of time in your life. So I feel like that is something that hasn't been explored, like in general, not just by people who are in this field, but like in general in the whole world. So I, like, as a science student, I am trying to investigate this. I'm hoping to do a summer internship where I can dissect one of these disposable sanitary pads and figure out actually what is in it. But I feel like this is definitely a topic or a conversation that hasn't happened and definitely needs to be investigated.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Segrist, it looks like you also unmuted yourself if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I was gonna say one other thing that's come up and kind of dovetailing on that. Obviously, we do send out a lot of disposable products, and a big conversation that we have here at the Alliance is how even in the demand for disposable products, can we be more aware of our impact on the environment? And it's taken a lot of work to find wholesale disposable products that are 100% biodegradable, which is just, I think, very telling of what you're talking about and how few people know exactly what are in these products. Obviously, we're really heavily reliant on donations here as a nonprofit. So we send out a myriad of things in our kits, but we really want to make sure that we're sending out quality things. We're not trying to replicate old school charity where we send the worst. We're trying to send the best that we have, right? And so it is a great honor that we can send out quality reusable products. Obviously, we get our pads from Dignity Period, which is awesome. And then oftentimes individuals will donate Pixie cups or June cups to us. And those are awesome. And people can get those through the St. Louis County Libraries. But it's been very eye-opening to me, especially in the last couple of years, of just trying to figure out what is inside and how can we be making sure that the people of St. Louis are getting quality products.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I really appreciated having the opportunity to moderate this panel, but I'm going to turn it back to Bree so that she can facilitate the audience questions part of this conversation. I'm already seeing some really amazing questions in the chat. So Bree, whenever you're ready.
All right, yes. So I saw two main questions. And first of all, I want to direct everyone's attention to the reactions button at the bottom of Zoom. Hold on one second, please. Yes, so the reaction button at the bottom of Zoom, that's where you'll find the raise hand function. So if you'd like to ask a question verbally rather than put it in the chat, that is definitely an option. But before we go to me for audience questions, I'm going to throw it to Cassie to talk about our amazing ambassador program.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Cassie Hage. I'm with the Office of Sustainability, and I'm really excited to announce and kick off this Reusable Period Product Ambassador Program. This started several years back with actually Ranen as a freshman proposing an idea to make period products more widely available. And I was brought in to talk a little bit about the environmental side and some of the reusable period products. But we're basically kicking it off. We have funding for 100 students to participate, and this is specific to WashU students. I know we have a number of folks on in the event that are not WashU students, and we can certainly hook you up with some of these resources if you are local to St. Louis. So through our website and through the QR code, and I think there's also a link in the chat, but we now have a registration form where you can sign up to get your own kit. So you have a choice of if you want just pads, just cups, or a kit, a starter kit. And what we hope you'll do, so you don't have to do this, but everyone who registers will be invited to kind of engage with us further. We'll have a Slack channel where you can interact with other people who are trying this out, should you have any questions that come up. And then we'll also have a session like a live session where we can get together and again, like talk about like, I tried it, it wasn't working. What am I doing wrong? How do I wash these things? Or, whatever it is, whatever questions come up or encouragement you need. And then the other thing is we want to follow people a couple months out to see how their experience was, if there are barriers that they're having as individuals, or if like with campus infrastructure, if they have trouble finding places where they can empty their cup, or whatever other barriers there might be. So we'll be sending out some anonymous surveys to try to get that feedback and get it to the right people across campus to make make changes. And then finally, what we're hoping is to generate enough information where we can basically advocate to always have these products available for anyone who requests them, for any student who requests them. So in addition to having access to disposable product across campus and in the public restrooms, to be able to learn more about and try out some of the reusable products. So please sign up if you're interested. There's zero risk to signing up, and we'll be in touch with how you can pick up your product.
Thank you, Cassie. I, for one, am super excited to try out the reusable pads. Definitely going to be a learning curve with a lot of you. So tune in to see what that is like. All right. So yes, we're going to go back